Hi, everyone. Welcome to the General Government Committee. The date is Wednesday, June 12th, and the time is 8 a.m., and we are convening for our meeting. We will go ahead and call to order and begin with roll call. All three council members are present. Councilmember Leatta Dahlhoff, Councilmember Joan Cathy, and myself, Councilmember Michael Althauser. Our first order of business to dispense with is approval of our meeting minutes from our May 8th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second.
There's a motion by Councilmember Cathy and that was seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes. So to take us into our substantive agenda, which is pretty packed for today, our first item is a 2025 comp plan update regarding our land use element. Brad, I don't know if you or Erica is going to walk us through that one, but
I will start by taking you through it. What I'd like to do today is basically introduce you to the process that we're going through to evaluate the goals, policies, and implementation actions throughout all of the elements. We're doing this process for each of the elements in turn. The Planning Commission has, we've discussed the conservation element. The lands for public purposes is on our agenda also to do, and we've also, with the Planning Commission, discussed land use. I think it's a very good process. It's a very iterative process, and so what I want to do is just lay out, excuse me, the format that we're using, so you as council members can go through what we're doing and see the changes and make recommendations on your own as we're doing this. Let me go ahead and share screen just to give you the example I want to present, provided, of course, for some reason, I am having issues. Can you see my full screen here? Probably not read the text.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't pass the vision test reading it, but I can see.
Okay. So I guess the first question is, did you pass the vision test?
I felt so no.
Okay. We'll deal with that in the meeting then. What we have is, this is the table that we're using just for the land use element. Our intent is to really, the first intent for any and all work that we're doing here is to make these goals, policies, and action items much more active, actionable, tied to specific outcomes and so forth. So this is a work in progress. We're not necessarily at the final language. This is our first go from the staff level on the land use element. But I wanted to lay out the format of the document so you can sort of follow along. So the first four columns here is our intended format for the new element that we'll bring to you this fall. And it lays out in bold is our goals. In the second column over is all of our policies. And then the third item here is our action items, where we're also going to be including who is going to be performing the action, a general timeline, and perhaps specific deliverables if that's appropriate for that. Tied to all of that is some of our staff notes, which we're also still working on. Our old goals, where we're trying to make sure that all of the language, to be honest, that was currently in the comprehensive plan, I think covers some very worthwhile topics. There are some things that we are going to be updating, changing, taking out because number one, they've mostly been accomplished, which is excellent. But there are also new requirements and so forth. So what we wanted to do is tie the new language with the old language throughout the document. And then the council, the Planning Commission has also been providing their comments on all this throughout this process. So they've been sending us either by email or just handwritten comments. And we've been incorporating that as through the process. So the one, we have presented this as you see it to the Planning Commission to introduce them to the topic, excuse me, at the last meeting. We haven't gone back and forth yet. The conservation element was the one that we did discuss at length last night with them. We spent about 2 hours actually going through all the policies and discussing each one in turn. So again, the intent is to come out with when we complete the full update, in this fall, we'll also have done the initial work on laying out the goals, policies, and implementation actions. I also want to scroll down a little bit and explain some of the headers. For the land use element on the very top, you see the goal, growth management goals. The intent here is really to focus in on sort of the very broad picture, why we're doing this in the first place, which ties back to the Growth Management Act at the state level. So the policies LU1, for example, and LU3 and 2 and all that, all are tied directly to the goals and actions. The specific goals in the Growth Management Act. The next section, we break down into specific community goals. And these were derived, first of all, from the original comprehensive plan, but we're also enhancing it because we're obviously doing a lot more work with housing and transportation and updates. And also, we've also done some more work with the open space. So these are sort of the broader, I want to say the next level of specificity in terms of the goals and actions, how we're trying to tie this together. This format, this breakdown would be reflected in the final document as well. So we don't want to create just a whole list of here's 13 goals and just go through them. We want to make it easier for people to understand and group them together and so forth. So this kind of formatting will follow in the final document. And then we get into the very specific land use goals. So for example, we have residential goals dealing with making sure we have adequate supply of land for housing. We make sure that we have protect residential development from undue excessive noise, dirt, and other nuisances and so forth. Commercial goals also carry over from the previous plan. What we didn't have in the 2016 plan was specific goals about manufacturing, industrial, and warehouse. We had lumped them all together with commercial. And in my mind, they're two separate things. They're two different kinds of land uses, two different kinds of effects from land uses. So we wanted to capture that as well. Then we go into things like the parks and open space, and then essential public facilities. This is something that we're bringing over from the conservation element right now. It's currently in that element, or excuse me, it's in the lands for public purposes. We're bringing it is in the lands for public purposes, but we don't actually have any policies or goals related to it. So this is brand new. I think it's very important that we actually have some policy basis for some of the requirements that we have under the state law and how we handle that. Now, essential public facilities are, again, all of those things that we need, but we don't necessarily want near us. Airports, large universities, jails, and so forth. But those are things that we need to address as a land use. Also, part of that is the airport. And we also had a separate section dealing with the airport that we're bringing over here. We also have a section dealing with historic preservation. And that it covers the goals and the general structure for what we're proposing for the land use. The rest of the sheets show things that we're moving back and forth between elements. So when we move things from other elements, we'll include them in this table. We've also moved a number of things from the land use to other elements. For example, the conservation element is going to get a whole series of things dealing with reducing impacts for flooding, stormwater management, and so forth. Since we're dealing with water quality and so forth in the conservation element, we thought it'd make more sense to include all those things in that place in one section, so we don't have duplicative things. We also have a number of things that we're moving over to the new climate element, and that deals with the energy efficiency and new development, things that we didn't have a home for before, but we put into the land use element, and now we have a place for those. So the intent again is to sort of make sure that we're tracking all of the existing goals and indicating where those are ending up and how we're going to be dealing with those. So if there's any questions and so forth during the process, we can evaluate that. We've also included a number of things that we have deleted and not replaced. In some cases, these are, we've provided our reasons for deletion. In some cases, we've already accomplished them. a big push before the 2016 update was to implement low impact development. What that is trying to keep stormwater on the site, infiltration as much as possible and so forth. All of that is now really incorporated all into our regulations. It's also really a central component of the state stormwater management requirements. So it's not necessary for us to keep that as an action item. We also have a number of other items of the similar thing in here. And then lastly, the section that deals with the land use element also had a separate section that dealt with implementation policies. And to be honest, it was kind of a strange section by itself that it was the things that we wanted to do to make sure that the policies and goals that we had outlined in the section above actually occurred. And we have some in some cases very specific things, some cases very general. What we have done going forward is move these implementation policies for the most part back up into the land use element policy discussion. And also the next version of this, you'll see discussion of what we've done, how we've changed the language and so forth. But we want to integrate these implementation policies back into the goals and policies so people can see that there's a direct connection between our goals and policies and how we're making sure that our plans are implementing those particular things. So that again is just a very brief update of where the structure of this is. The Planning Commission will be picking up the second round of land use discussions at their next meeting. And we've already updated this table a lot to reflect that. So if you want to track what we're doing, you're welcome to check in on the Planning Commission packets, or if you'd like us to provide you with updated copies of this as we go through the process, we're welcome to do that. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer those as well.
Councilmember Doha.
Thanks, Michael. Brad, one thing as I was reading it, just the word choice from older versions is if we could do like a control F for one of the missions talks about citizens of stormwater, right? Partnering with citizens. So I'm wondering if we can do like a control F for gender, citizens, like the keywords in the equity toolbox that's been moving forward. That was the one thing I noticed. And just like some update, like a summary of the steps. So however you do that, like if it's like just a couple bullet points throughout, I think that's sufficient, or a link to somewhere.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good, in addition to obviously making the policy language more action oriented, we're obviously looking at updating all the other, terms, either terms that are outdated or terms that are far too general to be really guidance. So things like neighborhood character, for example, what does that mean? When we say we preserve neighborhood character, what are we actually preserving? So we're trying to get much more detailed in those kinds of things. And again, thank you for the input on the citizen side of it. We're obviously moving away from that throughout our other documents. But if you see other language of that sort or other questions of terms that we use that, are too general, that aren't defined enough or have, I guess, a common understanding of what they mean, we're happy to make changes to adapt for that. One thing that we did talk last night about with the Planning Commission is the final version of all this is going to be an online version. We're probably going to have available to print out hard copies, but we're not going to use that as our primary means of disseminating the plan. So what we're going to be including is things like when we're talking about best available science or other terms that are used throughout the document that have very specific meanings, we're going to be incorporating things in there that go directly to a definition. So as somebody's reading the document, they can just click on the term, have that explained. So we help with that process as well.
I appreciate that. That's great. It provides better access.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Councilmember Kathy, you look pensive, like you have a question.
yeah, I do. I was just nothing. No, anyway, it's, is this all just rearranging things we've already talked about and done? And if I went to the work that we've done over the last few years or something, is that what this is?
It's a rearranging and updating. So number one, it's recognizing that a lot of work has already gone into these policies, and I don't think necessarily the community sentiment or the council direction has changed in such a dramatic fashion that we should toss everything out. What we do want to do is, as Leona pointed out, we want to update the language to reflect how we talk about things now, and also update, more importantly, we want to start thinking and developing those very specific implementation actions. So when we have a policy that says we want to create vibrant communities, well, let's talk about the details about how we're going to do that and put that into the plan. Meaning, are we going to change regulations in such a way? Are we going to have an educational program led by such and such? Those kinds of things. So our feeling is, for the most part, the policies provide a very good basis that really don't need a dramatic change. What we do want to do, however, is make it easier for people to access and use those things, and also tie that directly to actions. So it becomes much more of the document itself becomes something that is used much more than it is currently.
Well, I think we've talked about, though, looking at land use here in this committee more closely, or, you know, scrutinize some things. And as we move forward with, you know, development and climate and trees and all of the stuff that we've talked about kind of mixed together, we were moving toward hopefully some, not just new language, but some other changes maybe, or whatever. So we're not restricting ourselves by this, are we?
No, and I think that this is not perhaps my preferred order for doing this, but because we're still waiting for the land capacity analysis and a few other things that are going to inform the body of the land use element and the housing element, which are two big drivers for this update. We didn't want to wait to start talking about some of these general things and getting that going. Our intent really is, by the fall, we'll be in a position where we're starting to talk about the larger issues that I would have liked to start with to begin with, but this is, we're piecing the work out so we can try to get it all done, is what we're doing. But yes, we have a lot of things to talk about, but we do need the technical data before we're ready to really roll that conversation out.
Okay, I just didn't want to miss that conversation.
No.
And, you know, that seemed, that's high on my list anyway. So is how many pages would you say this is?
Just the thing. What the final document, or the intent of that,
what you're going to put online?
Well, we have discussed what we'd like to put online is each of the elements in two different parts. The first part would be everything dealing with the goals, policies, and action items. That would be a shorter document, say 12 to 15 pages in the case of the land use element at the very most. That is a much more usable document for the community and for the councils to pull off and say, I want to know what do we say about this, and use that as direction. We're also going to be including basically the technical side of the element as a separate part, and that will vary depending upon what the state requirements are for us to show our work as part of that process.
So you're going to have a technical part. Could you give me an example what that is as opposed to the other part?
For example, in the land use element, we'll need to demonstrate that we have what the acreages are for all of our land uses, and the fact that we have enough capacity in each of those to put the 20 years worth of growth into that. So there's a series of calculations that we do that we have to show as part of that work. And there's a number of things like that. And also there's some background information. I think that's also useful if the community wants to dive deeper into it, to explain some of the things of why we're paying attention to this and perhaps not other things, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I think those are questions that people have sometimes, because their interest or their concern is somewhere else, and so they want to know what. Yeah.
I apologize. The other thing that we're going to be providing, and what we had done in the previous version, is we will also have a user guide to the overall comprehensive plan at the end, as well as things like a supporting glossary of terms and things like that. So as much as possible, we want to, you know, give people the information that they can use themselves to use the document.
Mhm. Are you going to fix something so if I can just imagine some people like myself who want to see something on paper and be able to read it or compare or go back and not have to be using you know, a screen or a computer or whatever the whole time? I mean,
Yeah.
I know we've said before people could get copies of things, and I'm just wondering, is this one of those kinds of things, or?
Yeah, you know, I think we're kind of in a good position, given that this is where our lack of resources helps us. We have to create documents in some programs that we can, number one, be able to open up and edit over the course of the next 20 years. So that limits our, you know, interest in doing things in programs and so forth that are harder to, you know, print out and use. So the intent is if somebody would like a hard copy, it will be printable. It won't be tied so much to an online version that it's not readable, et cetera, in that format. So the intent is we have a lot of folks that still use written copies, printed out copies, and we want to accommodate that as well.
Okay, well, it's a lot of work. What
lot of
what
work.
prompted you to redo all of this? Was this something you hatched in-house, or is?
Well, we were bored and we thought, why not? No, this is again driven by the state requirements that we update the plan on a periodic basis. And the state has given us lots and lots and lots of new direction on how to do that. So that is what's really driving our work. We obviously have a lot of things that we have done since the last update that we want to incorporate, from the climate work to the urban forestry plan and the housing action plan. So,
Well, good work. I'm sure there'll be some changes along the way, and if this kind of a format or plan, way we're doing it makes that easier, that's also good.
yeah, it needs to be amendable in a simple way that.
So Brad, this sort of chart, I think really helps me visualize what we had versus what we're doing and some of the changes that are being made. Are you preparing, it looks like this is focused on just the land use piece, which is obviously one of the most densest and kind of challenging to digest sections of the comp plan. Is there a plan to do similar sort of summary charts for other sections?
Yeah, actually, we have done this for 4 of the elements so far. Erica will be talking about where we are with the conservation element, which is farther along than the land use element. And also we've done this for lands for public purposes and utilities. The intent is, we talked with the Planning Commission about the best format for us to work with them to go through this, and this is what we settled on. And so I think we will be using this throughout for each of the elements.
I imagine this is a tool when we do have joint meetings with the Planning Commission, that this will help facilitate some of those reviews and discussions.
Yes.
Great. Are there any other council members have questions about this one, about land use, about this update? Okay.
No, except just this is a very exciting time for us.
Yeah, I mean, this, we don't do it every year, thankfully.
I mean, it is a number,
10-year
10-year,
cycle?
right?
Yeah, we're now on a 10-year cycle, and it is actually an exciting opportunity for the city to revisit some fundamentals. So
You're shaping the future of the city. I mean, it's pretty
Mhm.
impactful.
In the period of time that, you know, we do this, seems like a long time. Do we go back and we do amendments and different things like that along the way, don't we? I mean, I don't want to get I personally don't want to feel, and I don't want others to, you know, of our community to feel we're stuck. This is it. You know,
No.
we've envisioned the future for the next 5 or 10 years.
No, there's a couple things. No, the city has an annual amendment process. So the city and or the public can propose specific amendments to the comprehensive plan as part of that annual amendment cycle. Land use element is probably the best example of something that we update almost every year, depending upon some land use changes or different things that we're incorporating. So the idea is obviously the document doesn't remain static. It becomes, you know, an active document. The key thing with the update is just making sure all the fundamental data and the basis for a lot of their, you know, assumptions for land use are updated enough so, you know, we're reflecting current trends and current concerns. Pre-COVID versus post-COVID is probably the biggest thing, and you'll see that especially when we start talking about the economic development plan update, the difference in the economy and what we should and shouldn't be doing to help, you know, with that.
Mhm. And also as we continue to update and do things with climate action, and that's not gonna stay static at all.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the state's requiring us to add an entire new element just exclusively focused on climate. That's,
Yeah.
yeah. We've never had that before. I think like we've done a great job of weaving climate into various elements, and we still do that in the new drafts. Like that's not going away. But now we will also have literally a standalone element regarding climate, which we've never had before.
And then as a quick sell for the future, you'll have a joint work session with the Planning Commission on July 9 to talk about the climate elements specifically. So that would be a good opportunity to get introduced to that.
Are some of our conservation elements cross over into climate?
There are things that cross over. For our purposes, we're trying to keep, number one, reduce the number of policies. So we're not trying to say the same thing across multiple, but we are also trying to make sure that there's a roadmap between each of the elements. So, you know, for example, if you want more information, go to this, that kind of thing. But yes, the climate element has its own very specific focus. The conservation element, as Erica will tell you, has two very distinct things that it deals with that are separate from the climate side, but are required under the GMA.
We're not bored anymore now.
That actually might be a good segue to move into our next agenda items. This is just an update. We don't have any council action that's needed right now. But our next is an update on the conservation element for the 2025 comp plan. I think Erica's going to join us and help us with that. Is that right?
Well, actually, Alex will be helping us with it.
Okay.
Alex is our lead for that. Alex joined me last night for our 2-hour discussion with the Planning Commission. So he's probably overflowing with energy.
Aren't we all?
But I'll let him take the lead. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. So my name's Alex. I'm a planner with the city. Great to see all of you. I'm going to be just going over a brief discussion about our current conservation element, just to, you know, do a brief overview, some, you know, topics addressed as a part of the element update, and then move into similarly the goals, policies, and action. So I know this has been touched on a little bit in the past, but just to make sure we're, you know, thinking and have the frame of mind as we move into this. So in the Growth Management Act, it requires that the city demonstrate that each element in the plan meets the 15 planning goals. The 2 goals related to conservation in the Growth Management Act are natural resource industries and environment. The conservation element has specific guidelines and policies that ensure the viability of natural resource industries and activities. Additionally, the conservation element will need to ensure the viability of natural resource industries in the city through the identification of such lands in the conservation element text and memo. The state legislature updated the environment goal in 2023 to add the requirement to enhance the environment. And the conservation element contains specific policies related to air and water quality, water availability, and protection and preservation of critical areas, and will now need to address how to enhance the environment, as I just mentioned. Additionally, each land use designation in the conservation element will need to be of an appropriate intensity for where it's spotted and applied. Of areas of environmental sensitivity will need to be designated as open space or a lower intensity designation than other areas in the city. So during the 2016 update, the items on the screen were incorporated into the conservation element, which included best available science at the time. After the comprehensive plan update was complete, the critical areas ordinance was amended to bring it in line with those state requirements. Topics that we anticipate needing to address in the 2025 update include incorporating environmental justice into goals and policies, discuss use of habitat conservation plans for management of affected listed species and prairie ecosystems across private and public lands in the city, use best available science and updated policies to designate and protect critical areas, use current data to update all maps, move goals and policies related to climate mitigation and greenhouse gas emission targets to the new climate element, add references to the updated shoreline master program, Thurston climate mitigation plan, and urban forestry management plan, and update policies on urban agriculture, forestry, resource lands, and mineral resource lands. Update municipal code as required following State Department of Ecology critical area checklist, and simplifying the language of both policies and focus on developing implementation actions that identify resources to implement the actions and timelines. With all of those items being considered, we're starting the conservation element update by reviewing the goals, policies, and implementation actions, as Brad mentioned with land use. Goals are statements of desired outcomes or intended achievements. Policies are specific statements that guide actions and provide a framework for future decision-making, and actions are specific implementation of goals and policies. And on the screen is an example of the goals, policies, and actions, or one of the goals, policies, and actions in our current comprehensive plan. And when developing the goals and policies, it's important to understand the policy strength continuum. Puget Sound Regional Council developed the explanation you're seeing on screen, and it just helps identify how to use active language and changing our current goals, policies, and actions to using that active language. The city of SeaTac did a great job, doing that and following this rubric. So we're trying to follow that similar type of model. And as you saw in the packet, we're proposing to update the format and incorporate active language as part of the update. As Brad already kind of went through, we've walked through the structure of the spreadsheet and how it's formatted. The Planning Commission has reviewed this once over the last month, and then last night we went through about 2 hours of going through different goals, policies, and actions as an initial run through of the way we're looking at this language and how it's going to be in that final version. To provide some organization for the proposed goals, we've grouped them together into 3 overarching categories. So the first one being environmental goals, and those ones include using the best available science, promoting natural resource conservation, critical area protection with the community, enhance water quality, enhance national drainage systems, and improving air quality. The next grouping is environmental sensitive areas, which includes protecting streams and lakes, enhancing wetlands, protecting groundwater, protecting geological hazardous areas, preserve floodplains, and enhance wildlife habitat. So these are all kind of the overarching goals, and then we've got policies and actions layered underneath those, which you have probably seen in your packet. And then lastly, we have natural resource areas, which include urban agriculture, urban forestry, and protecting mineral resource lands. And then, just lastly, we have incorporated some of this already as a part of staff's feedback and also Planning Commission's feedback, and we'll be looking to gather your feedback as much as possible over the next coming months as we are looking to draft the climate element over the summer and through the beginning of the fall, and coming back to you all in October to do a review of the actual draft element. So this is not the last time you're going to see this, but we would appreciate your feedback as early as possible in the process, so we can limit the amount of revisions that we're doing throughout the next couple of months. So we would appreciate any feedback on the goals, policies, and actions in the packet, within the next month if possible. That is the conclusion of my presentation, but like Brad, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and hopefully Brad will jump in. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I just want to give a brief explanation again on the structure of the conservation element. As Alex mentioned, it has two primary components. Number one, dealing with the critical areas that are outlined in the state Growth Management Act that we have to address. And then resource lands, which are kind of a interesting thing because resource lands for the most part are a rural function. So when we're talking about forest lands, that's actively managed forest, actively managed agricultural land, and mineral resource land. Now, the city has designated mineral resource lands in the city, so we have to address those. We also had at the last update, well, at least one parcel that was a designated forest land. So we'll be updating that and dealing with that as well. Forest agriculture in the city, to be honest, we don't have any designated agricultural land. And if we did, that land really shouldn't be in the city. It should be out in the county and protected in a different fashion. So our focus, again, is to carrying over from the 2016 plan is there was a big emphasis in that plan about urban agriculture that led to a number of changes in the development code to accommodate that. So that's everything from small hobby farms to providing, food and elsewhere throughout the community as part of, various programs and educational things. We're going to be including that as part of this update, and that's what the focus of the policies are. In a similar fashion, on the forestry side, we have our urban forestry plan now. So we're going to be incorporating that specifically into this conservation element, dealing with urban forestry in the urban contracts versus the forest resource context, which is the GMA focus.
Councilmember Doff, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'm just wondering, so with Alex and Brad's comment about reviewing from council, it's challenging for me to edit a PDF, right? The packet. So what moving forward, what is the best way to meet your needs of like, are you going to email us like an Excel and we track the changes? How do you want council to reply back to you with the edits?
So what we've been doing with the Planning Commission is offering them a couple different formats. What we have obviously is what goes into the packet that goes into the public record. What we've also been providing separately to the Planning Commission is the Word documents, so they can update, edit those if they want. And in a lot of cases, we've also offered printouts that are available at the counter that they can come and pick up and edit and update as they want. So we're open to whatever format works for the council in providing the information back to us. We recognize the PDF format is not a great format, to be honest, to really do edits and everything else. But we'll provide other means if we need to.
For myself, if you could email and then a document that I could edit, and then the deadline that you want it back by.
Okay. So what we'll do then is we'll provide both the land use and the conservation documents that you've seen today to the three of you in email and in terms of Word documents. If you have issues with editing and changing and whatever in that, let us know and we could provide other things.
Thanks, Brad.
I'll just echo that it would be helpful if you do use track changes, just so we can identify what those changes are and make sure that we can reconcile differences or incorporate everything correctly.
I have a question, a couple. First of all, not just recently, but somewhere, so I had it in my notes. How do we define critical areas?
Critical areas is, fortunately for us, is something that's defined under the Growth Management Act. It's similar to best available science and other things like that, that there's a specific state meaning and state things that we deal with under critical areas. For example, we're required to have regulations that protect wetlands. And wetlands themselves are further defined. We're also required to protect habitat that's defined under the state law, geologically hazardous areas, floodplains, those kinds of things. So we're relying on state definitions for what those things are for our work. And the other good thing is that really those definitions have been developed, and I think everybody, not everybody, I think almost everyone is now in agreement when we talk about those things, since we've got about 25 years worth of work now of saying, when we say critical areas, we mean this. So we're starting from what the state requires us to do. And more importantly, our Title 16 regulations and environment are exactly, if you want to know the details of how that's actually put into the ground, that's really how that all appears when it comes to regulation.
So do we as a city have regulations other than that? I mean, or do we just depend on the state's critical areas ordinance to do our environmental work? Or
what we have is state guidance, and state guidance that is updated on a fairly regular basis. For example, the Department of Ecology takes the lead on updating the wetland regulations. There are some very specific things that we need to do and evaluate. There is a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we approach some of these things, but the baseline is really established by the state. They don't have a model ordinance as such, but they do have, in some cases, very specific language, say for ranking and evaluating wetlands. There's a number of tables in there that are derived directly from the state guidance. In other cases, in other departments on the state level, say Department of Fish and Wildlife handles the habitat side of things. They have different levels of guidance because unlike wetlands where you can have a very prescriptive process, dealing with animal habitat or other things like that, because of the range of species that are protected and the different requirements and so forth, the process is a little bit more not as prescriptive in the sense of that you follow this in this particular order and you reach a result. It's a series of, you need to obviously evaluate, here are the species of concern, here are the things you need to be looking at for those species, but it's really in the form of how the reporting is done, how the reports are prepared by the applicant and sent into the city for evaluation. So our regulations really are obviously, there isn't a model ordinance on the state level that drives these, but there's obviously different levels of guidance that we have to incorporate.
and then from there, we write some of our own that has to do with our city or how we
Correct.
want to treat the environment or whatever.
Correct. So for example, on the habitat side, there are three levels. There's the federal side, the state side, and also the local side of things. So if there are particular things that the city is concerned about that we want to address, that's also our opportunity to do that.
Mhm. So before we proceed on all of this, will we have a new or whatever, a tree ordinance?
Well, it depends on if we're successful in hiring another planner. We have an interview on Friday. If we have that, then we'll have the capacity to restart work on the urban forestry amendments. Our intent is, and likelihood is, we'll finish those probably before we wrap up the comprehensive plan, but those things will be happening probably at the same time.
So we'll be working on writing some new things with the tree ordinance while we're doing this. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. What we have is, and this is just dealing with the urban forestry amendments. When we had to pause our work last year, we had actually gotten to the point of, we had prepared the ordinances essentially, and we're ready to bring those forward to Planning Commission. We had finished the public process. We had done the development of everything. So we're probably about halfway through all the work that we intended to do. Once we have our staffing sorted out again, our intent is to restart the process, evaluate what we did a year ago, make sure that obviously that still is in accordance with what we want to do, And then we'll be bringing that forward through the public process. So we're looking at this fall having a joint work session with the Planning Commission and the Tree Board to restart that process. I think tentatively we've scheduled that for October. We need to, obviously, we need to bring our staff on board to help us. We also need to re-up our contracts with the various consultants that are helping us with this. So you'll be seeing probably some amendments to existing contracts come across in terms of the council approval process. So that will be an indication of where we are in the process.
Yeah, I just hope that we don't get ahead of ourselves here in writing things or, planning our future, plans in, environmental plans and things without new revised, extended or whatever tree ordinance, that we're not going to build it off this old one. But
No. And I think the important thing is, and again, the things that are dealing with the urban forestry in the conservation element are coming a lot from the work that we've already done for the urban forestry management plan, our master plan, excuse me. So we've done a lot of that work already. We're not going to go in a dramatically different direction from what we've already outlined as part of that plan. So I think the work we're doing is fine. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. I think we've done the necessary background work. We have the necessary direction. Now it's just a matter of putting that into regulation.
so is that an area that will come up for us to make comments on, like we are on these other areas?
Yep. Yep. No, it will follow our normal ordinance process. We'll be giving you as the GDC an update, obviously, where we are in the process. When we are much closer in terms of feeling that we're going to be saying, yes, we are restarting the project, meaning that we have our staff on board, we have our consultants all set and everything, we will give you a briefing on number one, on where we left off. So to remind everybody what the process had been up to that point, and then give you an idea of where we're going with that. So yes, the council obviously will be involved, the tree board and the planning commission will also be involved in those processes as well.
I wish, in light of what we've encountered in the last month or so, that we had kept those consultants and gotten a little farther in this before everything fell apart, because we could use some extra guidance here. So anyway, I'm glad to hear the thing, and thank you for reviewing that critical areas. Some people, a couple that are very environmentally involved, wondered how those got designated and why we allow things in certain areas, and then all of a sudden we say, well, that's critical areas, we can't do it. Speaking of these critical areas, are all areas, riparian areas along streams and rivers, critical area? Did those two definitions go together?
For the most part, there's a couple distinctions that come into play on the regulatory side. Number one, the larger water bodies like the Deschutes and Percival Creek and a couple of the larger lakes in the city fall under our shoreline management plan and all the regulations that are part of that. That's again a separate state thing that has now been brought into the GMA, but it's a separate set of regulations and policies that deal with activities along and in those areas. For those things that don't meet the threshold to be in the shoreline management plan, the smaller creeks, the smaller lakes and so forth, we address those as part of our critical area ordinance in Title 16. So you'll note there's an important distinction between some of the regulations at times, which is, I'm going to say, is a little frustrating for me. The shoreline management plan, when we adopted that, the ecology required us to basically incorporate all of the critical areas regulations that affect those as part of that document. So it was basically frozen in time as of 2019 when we finished that update, meaning that in order to update those regulations, we have to reopen the whole shoreline management program again every time we update our regulations. Now, that process last time only took us about 15 months to make some very minor changes. to go through the entire approval process, which means that our critical area regulations under the shoreline management plan and our critical areas under the regular thing aren't always in sync. And that's a little frustrating on my part because my preference obviously would be if we have best available science, we use that across the board. But it's just a function of how the approval process goes and what the state law is on that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks for walking us through these, Brad.
Yeah.
Councilmember Dolph, do you have any questions about this one before we move on? Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving down the agenda just because we're getting closing in on 9 a.m. We're probably gonna go a bit over that though, so we have 2 items left. The next one, I will just sort of give a brief introduction is regarding the multifamily tax exemption. We have an exemption before us, so we'll be talking about. But at our last, was either our last meeting or the meeting before, we talked about the desire to sort of get a snapshot of the MFTE and the policies that we have and how those have progressed since we enacted them. So Brad, I think you're going to walk us through this, but I believe your presentation has some information at the beginning of it about about a review of our FTE policies and how those have been used by community members working to provide more housing. So with that, can you feel free to take it away?
Okay. I'm sharing screen, so let me know if everyone can see that. So what specifically the action before you for the General Government Committee is we have a contract approval for a specific 8-year multifamily tax exemption from a project called the Rookery Apartments on Capitol Boulevard. To give you a little background on the multifamily tax exemption process, in 2014, the council approved the Capitol Boulevard Corridor Plan. They also in the same year adopted the Brewery District Plan. In both of those plans, there were a number of implementation actions identified to achieve the goals of the plan. And in this particular case, in the Capitol Boulevard Corridor Plan, it was redevelopment of the corridor. And one of the mechanisms that was recommended was establishing a multifamily tax exemption program to really improve the financial viability of redevelopment within the corridor. The concern is we're dealing in the corridor with very small parcels for the most part that are difficult to redevelop. And if we want to achieve the vision that has been outlined in the plan, that we need additional steps to help development do that. So in 2017, the council adopted the multifamily tax exemption program to do 2 things. Number one, to stimulate development on the economic side. And then second of all, provide multifamily housing development where there isn't, and that by the idea here is also encouraging residential development in transit corridors and walkable areas and all of that. So the multifamily tax exemption program included 2 different levels of exemptions. There's the 8-year exemption, which is just to really this is the economic focus one. This is the one that says we want people on the ground, we want development to occur, and all of these things are in support of our economic development goals. The 8-year tax exemption does not include an affordable housing component. There's not a percentage set aside for that as part of the program. And it truly is just for economic development and encouraging those things that we want to see there. The 12-year does include that. So when we've been talking about that in both the Brewery District and in the Capitol Boulevard corridor, those are the 2 parts of those programs. As I mentioned, really the purpose of the program again is to be a catalyst for economic development. The idea being that we have more people who live in the corridor, we create more customers for retail uses. We provide basically, the push to have other properties redevelop, and really that's the intent of the program. We're also again wanting to make sure that we encourage multifamily development in those areas where they're already served by transit, that there's already a good sidewalk network, there's already good access to other walkable things in those areas. And sometimes we need a little additional push in order for those things to pencil out and actually the development to occur. So in terms of the general effect of how this works in terms of revenue, anytime we approve a multifamily tax exemption, it's a shift in revenue from the sources for property tax. The city council sets the city's property tax levy. The city levies a total dollar amount that will be collected for city operations. When certain owners get discounts, such as through the multifamily tax exemption program or other programs that we have, that cost is redistributed to other property owners in the city. So how many discounts we provide, the city is still going to receive the same amount of revenue. Now, property tax collection obviously has multiple parts to it. There's the city component, there's the county component, and there's obviously the schools and so forth. The cost of this program is spread out across the taxing basis for each of those parts. So when we're talking about amount of money that somebody is not paying in order to participate in this program, those funds are spread across all of the property owners within the city, if that's part of the city component, all the property owners within the county, if it's part of that component, and so forth. So actually, it is if we didn't do this, we would be providing a direct incentive from the city, and we'd have to account for that as well. And how we would actually pay for that would probably be solely through the city revenue and solely through the city tax collection. So that sales tax or property tax and so forth, those people who are paying that would be affected by that. In terms of what the program has produced to date, this is through last month. This does not include this particular proposal. There are two levels of approval through the multifamily tax exemption. The first level is a conditional approval. It's essentially saying that the project is something that is viable, that the city has reviewed the application and approved it on an administrative level. The council has approved the contract that comes with that approval. We have 3 different projects right now that are in the conditional stage right now that have received conditional approvals but are currently under construction. They represent 300 units. There's 263 market rate units, and there's also 37 affordable units as part of that. We also have one project that has been final, meaning that they've received final approval. They have a certificate of occupancy, and we're actually doing annual reporting now on each of the units and so forth to the state on them. That represents 141 units, out of which 112 are market rate and 29 are affordable units. In terms of the breakdown by area, we have 2 projects right now that have conditional approvals in the Brewery District. One is very close, I think, to getting certificate of occupancy. The other one is still in the construction process. All of those are market rate units. They're all 8-year exemptions. We don't have any, current projects in the Capital Quarter. This particular application would be our first. Under the 12% option, we have 2 separate projects in the Little Rock area. One of which I had mentioned it's been finalized. The other one is still very close to being finalized. Actually, you can see it from the freeway in terms of where they are in terms of construction. So we're in pretty good shape in terms of getting the units that we intended to get through this process. The specific application contract that's before the GDC today is a project called the Rookery Apartments. It's located at 6501 Capitol Boulevard. It's just north of the intersection of Capitol Boulevard and Dennis Street on the east side of the road. The project will be providing 6 units of new multifamily housing. They have applied for an 8-year multifamily tax exemption to get the project built. The project is located here just south of Z Street. It's on that parcel. Anyway, the information is on the screen on where the project is located. The approval process for a conditional certificate is outlined in section 330 of the municipal code. And it establishes a review and approval process for the applications. The applicant has filed a complete conditional certificate application with the city. City staff has reviewed that application and determined that it is complete and meets the requirements of the code section. And the community development director has approved the conditional certificate, subject to approval of the contract, which is what the council approval is tied to. In order to complete that conditional certificate of approval, the applicant must enter into a contract with the city that is approved by the council, under which the applicant agrees to complete the development as outlined in the contract. The approved certificate and contract are valid for 3 years from the date of approval. They have 3 years to complete construction. There is the ability to extend if needed, but we've been fortunate to be able to complete most of these within the 3 years of the date of approval. The next step of the process, once they have certificate of occupancy, meaning that it's ready to be occupied and be used, is we go through a second application process for a final certificate. We review that, make sure all the conditions of the original conditional approval were met, and then we file the final certificate of tax exemption with the Houston County Assessor's Office. The recommended action from staff today is that the General Government Committee place the contract for the 8-year multifamily tax exemption for the Rookery Apartments on your agenda for your July 2nd meeting, with a recommendation to approve and for the authorize the mayor to sign. So if you have any questions, I am available to answer those.
I have a question. This is part of a mixed use proposal, is that right?
Yes, it is.
It's on the packet.
And if the General Government Committee has specific questions, we also have the applicants available if you have any questions on what the project encompasses and so forth. Tessa is available and Tyrell are available.
Okay. Councilmember Kathy, I think you have
I
a
have
question.
big questions about this. All the way back to the time when we first did it, I voted against it every time, which I plan to do today. But Brad, in one of those slides that you showed, there's no way of getting around the language that's on the page that says that it will raise taxes, because somehow we're making the city whole, but we're doing it on the backs of people who have to pay taxes. You can't get around that. There's no way you can give people this kind of a tax break and say that the city's not going to lose any revenue unless you put it somewhere else. I mean, that just makes sense. And I don't know if you can go through and, you know, add to the requirements or change them or whatever. But I think it is absolutely wrong that the 8-year does not have to have any low income housing. That's our goal. That's one of the reasons way back when we said we were doing this. And I think they should have, no matter what their size, a percent of that. Can you amend these things along the way or change the requirements or that kind of thing? Because everyone knows how important taxes are and how touchy they are. And people have, you know, picked up on what's going here, and have said things to me like, you know, why are we paying people to come? We're a great place. And I mean, why should people get a break to come and make their money here? Or, you know, all of those kinds of things. And I don't think we have good answers. I don't think that, you know, I think this is a place where we're using the wrong tool for economic development or having people walk around, you know, on our streets or whatever. So I'm just saying that I don't think that this is, I don't think this is good for our community per se. And the people who are asking for this are not people who, you know, financially need a break. These are some of them I know the people, they're wealthy developers. And the other thing I wanted to ask is there any way to amend anything here where in under the 12-year which we've done a number of those for larger you know, number of units. Could you review how long they have to keep those affordable? The percent, they're 20%, right, of theirs and 8 is no percent. Under the 20%, how long do they have to do that? If they're people who go in there originally and they leave in 2 years, can they rent it then at market rate?
No, the requirement of the contract is that they provide 20% of their units as affordable within a particular income bracket for 12 years. That is established in their contract and also within our regulations. Let me back up and try to
So
address
it's
some
for
of
the
those.
length of the exemption.
Correct. And now, obviously, the who is renting those units will be changing over time and so forth, but the units themselves and what they can rent them for has to meet the income guidelines. So let me start first by addressing your first concern about affordable housing. I think whether we're talking about this specific program, which is something the state has made available to us as a couple things, obviously I mentioned the importance of using this as an economic development tool, also as a mechanism perhaps for providing additional affordable housing that we don't get in the community. All of the things that we are going to be doing going forward to support affordable housing, meaning those for incomes that are under the 100% AMI of any level, is going to require a level of public support, and that's going to require some level of public investment. So we can't really speak of a situation where the city can say, yes, please build affordable housing that's going to be affordable to those who can't meet the current market rate without some level of investment on our part in order for that to happen. So I think we need to understand that as part of the broader context. Now, whether or not this particular program is the best mechanism to do that is another question. And I think it's always something that we can discuss further. The state has obviously taken a number of looks at adopting and changing the program since it was first adopted. And since the council has included this as part of the adoption process, they've given us a lot more options, a lot more flexibility in terms of affordability and so forth. The important thing to understand, I think, and anytime we do an evaluation of whether or not an incentive program or anything else that we use for affordable housing will work, is whether it will actually be used by the market or not. There needs to be an evaluation of whether or not the incentives are something that actually makes sense to somebody who has the capacity to develop in the community to use. If we put together a program that requires such a high level of requirements, no one's going to use the program. And so we have, we can say we have this beautiful program, but if it's not being used, it's not achieving the goals of what we intend to do. So we need to keep that in mind. As part of the adoption process for this, we have included, we had a discussion of this particular item last year as part of our broader discussion of affordable housing. It is certainly something we can always talk about adding to our particular work program to deal with on a larger level. When we talked about this last year, we identified a number of different steps that we believe we should go through as part of the evaluation of the effectiveness of the program and whether or not we, first of all, the categories, do we keep this or not? If we do, how do we want to amend it to make it work more in a fashion that would be supported by the city? That takes time and effort, and that's something I think is part of the discussion for our work program in 2025 is something we can certainly have as part of that process.
I thought we were going to have that discussion before we did another one of these approvals. That's why I'm, probably more adamant about it today than well, maybe not than normal. But we haven't talked about it, and I mean, can we answer my one question? Is this program and how these things are done? Can we, as a city, set anything in them? Can we amend anything? Can we make other requirements or anything, or is it set already?
We have a process that currently exists, and people can find that and avail themselves of it as it exists today. So I think, Councilmember Kathy, to your question, if you're talking about a proposal that has already been submitted, they have the ability to work with the laws that we currently have. If you're asking a question about, can we amend it for future parties, that's, I think, the process that Brad is talking about.
Yeah.
where we would need to have it on a future work plan. But like we, as a council, we have passed laws saying that this is a program that we want to make available to the public. We do not have, once someone starts working through that process, we don't have the ability to negotiate or amend those things. And I think from my perspective, in terms of fairness, if we say that something is available, I understand I obviously know you have concerns about this. We've talked about it before, right? But if something is available as a program for folks to avail themselves of it, I think it's sort of a matter of fairness to be able to have it be the way that it is, in addition to just being a legal requirement too. Like if we say this is how it works, and then it's up to the council to approve these things, which I believe that's a state law requirement, then that's the process that exists. And once people embark upon entering it, that's the process that is navigated, because it's what we've legally said there is.
Yeah, I totally understand that. That's why I push this every time, to have the discussion before we approve another one of these. And we never seem to get at the level of, making any kind of changes or amendments or whatever. I mean, I'm totally yes, that once we decide to give one of these, like this rookery, or cookery or whatever it is, of course we have to follow through with that. I'm just saying again, years and years and years into this, I'm singing the same tune. Where is the discussion to say, could we add to 8 years some low income? Just giving an example of something.
To also be fair to staff, at our last meeting, which you can see in the minutes that we approved, we also said it's incumbent upon us as council members that my exact words were, we have a homework assignment to reach out to staff to say, we have specific questions we want to see answered. What are those? So we made a commitment at that meeting to say that this is what we want to know about. So if you have a specific question about, like, I don't know the answer whether the RCW allows us to require affordable housing for the 8th year. Like, I don't know the answer to that, but we could add that to the agenda for a future meeting to talk about what exists. There's also another, like, I think since we adopted this, the state actually created a new one. There's a 20-year tax exemption that allows you to do a 20-year exemption, and then the units have to be affordable for 99 years as a requirement of that. And, that's not available to us as a city, but I believe Olympia enacted it somewhat recently, maybe last year, I don't know. That's another example of things we could talk about too. The general direction for that meeting that we gave as a council was to look at some of the program components and where we are today in terms of what units have been created and what programs have been exercised and utilized. And, I think, to be fair, that was the direction that we gave for this meeting, as opposed to asking for specific presentations on other policies that could be implemented and adopted in the next work plan. But speaking also just to the staff capacity, like, we need to be cognizant that when we absolutely have the power in ordinance to change how some of these elements look when we're not precluded by state law to that degree. But that takes a significant amount of legal research, time, effort, and stakeholdering with important parties that are utilizing these programs in order to actually come up with a draft ordinance and make those changes. I think we need to recognize that we're talking about hundreds of hours of work probably to get to that endpoint, which, to Brad's point, that's why we're looking at it for a 2025 work plan, because it's not on the work plan currently. And the way things get on the work plan is at our retreat, we set goals, we create strategies, and some of those are broader in nature, one of which is assuring more affordable housing and just more housing generally. And as a council, we have voted that this is a tool that does that. I think you've identified a concern that you think there are better tools out there. I really want to have those conversations. Like, we need every tool there is, because this is a crisis affecting all corners of the community. So I'm really eager to have that conversation, but I also don't want to sidetrack our other concurrent projects, like the comp plan is thousands of hours of work to get that done. I assume. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it's I don't know. But there's also the tree ordinance that we want to do concurrently with it. Like the amount of work that community development is doing is pretty immense, and I am, want to be cognizant of that, and really hope we are successful in staffing up. My fingers are crossed for this interview on Friday I heard about earlier, but
Michael, can I just add to this? So it's 9:15 and I have a hard stop at 9:30. Like I physically have to leave. And so one thing, I don't want this to go on a consent agenda. I think there needs to be a larger discussion with the full council, right? Because of the dynamic and the discussions in the general government. So I am supportive of it moving forward to a full council discussion and for council considerations. That's just, if I have to leave, that is my request.
And I understand, I mean, I understand this thing. I understand how it works, and I've seen it in also other cities. How do we answer people though? Coming back to, dialogue with the community, are we trying to hide that really the people who own homes in Tumwater, their taxes are not at all impacted by us giving, tax relief in these programs? I mean, I don't feel in good conscience when someone talks about it or knows about it or sends us, comments as council members that I can't say it. It says it right in what Brad read today. So that's another thing that I want us to, consider, just to talk about, because the city doesn't lose anything, but the people pay more.
Well, I think I would like to answer that. I think what makes this actually an interesting thing is the fact that exactly what happens and where that money comes from. What isn't always as clear when we're dealing with other affordable housing projects is who is actually paying for that and how. With the multifamily tax exemption process, it's actually very clear. If we're going to do this, it comes from the larger property base. Anytime that we provide some level of subsidy, whether we're, say, for example, the recently approved HUD grants for affordable housing, things that we do on the state level that are providing affordable housing in the community, all of those things are coming from the tax base and coming from various sources of taxes. What's not clear, and it's not clear to a lot of people, is exactly how it affects them. The multifamily tax exemption program is actually, I want to say, a little clearer than some of those in terms of how you're paying and who's paying. And that's probably part of the discussion process. But I want to emphasize that anytime that we do actions as a city to support services or things that provide for others in the community who don't have the ability to do that for themselves, that comes at a cost, and it is something that is borne by the rest of the community. So it's not something that is isolated. This is not a unique situation, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Understood.
we're running a little low on time, but Tessa, I do want to recognize you have your hand up.
Hey, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for your advocacy, Councilmember Cafe. I own the Artisans Group, which is a 100% women-owned firm locally in Tumwater that focuses on affordable housing. And we're 100% women-owned, and we're focused on hiring people of color and members of the queer community. So we're really, really different in terms of architecture firms locally, specifically. And we're self-developing this project. So this, in our case, isn't a rich developer coming in. This is 4 middle-class people that have banded together to try and do 6 apartments, the first of its kind on the downtown corridor. We did pursue affordable housing initially because I'm Habitat for Humanity's architect. So we're doing the Talichan townhomes in Tumwater, 112 units at the Boulevard. I don't think any other firm is doing even remotely close to the amount of affordable housing that we're doing in the next few years. And we've been really involved in the missing middle, and we're really, really active in those arenas, which is why I appreciate, the council having sensitivity to that. We pursued affordable housing initially, but we're doing the project as net zero energy, and it's certified passive house. So it's going to be almost off the grid. It's going to make as much energy as it uses and be highly sustainable and high performance. To do that, our margins got really slim. And the bank likes to see a cash flow ratio of its 1.25. We got down to 1.1. And the tax credit, the 8-year tax credit that we've applied for, is actually the reason we were able to get our loan. And in addition to our loan, we also had to promise our houses, all 4 of us, as well as my business. So the Artisans Group is on the line. My home is on the line. I guess presumably my son going to college is on the line. And so I really hear you, and I don't think I'm smart enough to make the big policies that you guys are working on, but I did want to just share the information that this is a very good project. This is a good project for the environment. This is a small scale being done by local people that live and have lived here a long time, that operate businesses here. Our business operates, does a lot of work free or greatly reduced for the affordable clients that we have, like Homes First and Habitat for Humanity. So we don't have buckets of profit to make this project pencil. And if we don't get the multifamily tax exemption, I'm not even sure what happens, because the bank relied upon it to give us our loan, because we are at the very break-even point of this project. And so, there's a lot of unintended consequences to policy, and I appreciate that. But the consequence to this policy as it sits is that small local grassroots developments is going to do a highly sustainable project of a small scale in a neighborhood that is a part of the city's vision. They want to see it happen. That this is the kind of work that's supposed to happen along the Capitol Corridor. So I feel your concerns, and I in no way want to defend some really good points that you've brought up. But I will say that this tax credit makes an enormous difference to a couple of locals trying to do our first at scale development of this kind. So that's all I wanted to share. And I just
thanks for coming and doing that. I mean, that's I think that's wonderful. And I've heard about your group, and I knew you were working with some of these others. I used to have a neighbor who she wasn't an architect, but early on worked with you somehow. We can talk about that later. So I'm all for what you're doing, and this is a good use of this. I think we need to be more clear, and you're an example of how the kinds of things we're trying to do really make a difference. And I think all of us know that there are different levels of people using this, and I'm kudos to you. I'm going to watch your development, and I'm going to make sure that you don't and your people don't become homeless. So we have to have more percentage of people, on that level. So
this is another great example to put it for council consideration to share the sustainable element in that component.
Yeah, exactly. So people who have questions see also who wants to use this program. Yes, absolutely.
We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to move us along. There's no objections, and would entertain a motion to place the contract for the 8-year multifamily tax exemption for the Rickery Apartments, TUM 24-0714 on the City Council consideration calendar, not consent, but considerations, with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. And I'll make the motion if there's a second.
Well, Lietta's the one who wanted to do it that way. So.
Second.
All right. Motion by myself and seconded by Councilmember Doff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, the motion passes. that brings us to our last item, and Leetta, I know you may have to hop off, but we'll still have quorum. So if we go past 9:30, feel free to get to your obligation.
Yeah, I'm in
Um,
support of this moving forward, but I also think it should be under council consideration because this is a huge deal. That's my
Okay.
only comment.
Noted. But that brings us to the service provider agreement with Barker Rinker CCAT Architecture for a community center design. And I think Chuck, you're gonna help us with this one.
Yes, I will walk you through that. We went through a request for proposal process and got 5 firms that wanted to help us with the design of our community center. Through a committee which Councilmember Kathy was on, we selected Barker Rinker CCAT as our design consultant. We have worked with Barker Rinker CCAT before, both on our original community center design in 2009. That was for the Public Facilities District project. So it's a very similar project that we're doing now. We also worked with them in conjunction with the City of Olympia on feasibility study for aquatics in Thurston County more recently.
Chuck, before you get started, can I just ask a question so I can put this? Are we going ahead with this design and stuff without the property?
Right.
Without the location, without the property, without knowing where it's going to be?
Yes, and I'll explain that.
'Cause
So,
it's like,
as-
feels like
as-
the car with the horse.
Well, I think we're hooking up the horse to the cart as a part of this process, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yes,
Uh,
it does.
So let me go through. So there's 3 groups working on this project. One is an internal staff group. We call that our sort of our steering committee, and that's basically made up of staff, and we'll work with BRS to do the internal administrative stuff. We're setting up the studies, setting up the meetings, talking about the direction, making sure we're staying on track to all those kinds of things. We'll have a steering committee, which will do the bulk of the work on this project with staff and with BRS. Members of that committee, there'll be a council representative on that committee. When we talked about this I think 2 years ago at the Metropolitan Park District Board, it was Councilmember Kathy at that time. We'll have representation from the Parks Commission, from the Tumwater School District, from our senior center, from youth sports, from the chamber, Tumwater Chamber, and a couple community members at large. And we'll also have a representative from the YMCA that's going to be a part of that group. And then the third group, which the biggest group is the public. We'll have a lot of this whole process is driven by public input, which will enable the steering committee to decide which direction we're going. So we'll have a community survey that we're going to do as a part of this, and we'll have 2 community workshops where we're going to go out to the public and say, this is what we heard that you wanted through the survey. Did we get it right? Let's talk about that. And we'll take that information back and go through it again. We'll have another community meeting, probably at the high school, and invite anyone and everyone and go through that process again, just to make sure this is what we heard. Is this what you want? This is the direction we're going. As far as siting goes, we have 4 sites that we're going to analyze, and we do have a analysis, a matrix that we go through to decide which site is going to be the best site for this facility. Right now, we're looking at the brewery property, port property off of Tumwater Boulevard, the DOT property on Capitol Boulevard, and then we've agreed with the YMCA that we'll look at their development on 93rd as a possibility. So very cut and dried. We'll go through our matrix. We'll score each site and see which one comes out best. If something else comes up in the process, another site, say south or west on Israel Road by Toyota or some of the developments over there, we may take a look at that too. So really an exciting time. You know, we told the public when we put the Metropolitan Park District information out there that we were, you know, our big wow item as part of that vote was creating a community center, and people supported that. We told them it would be the community center with meeting and event space, senior services, indoor sports, and land for a future public swimming pool. So whether we do the pool or not, we're looking for a site that has enough available land outside of the building that we can expand at some point in the future, if that's what the council and the city, the residents want to do. So we had originally, and on my staff report, it says we were going to send this to council work session on the 25th. I believe that's been canceled. So I'm looking for a recommendation to send it to a city council meeting on July 2nd. And if you would like it to be on considerations, I would certainly do that. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to address it.
So when will you, oh, go ahead.
No, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I
Councilmember
don't
Kathy.
have, yeah.
Go for it.
I just wanted to ask Chuck, what is your timeline or goal for putting this committee together? You say you have internal things going, and then the next level of the ones you mentioned to talk about this.
Yeah, I've talked with the senior council at Old Town Center. I've had talks with Kevin at the superintendent of Tumwater Schools. As soon as we get the contract done and signed and put into motion, then we'll look at getting going as quickly as we can on putting this together and really getting the process going.
Some of the other organizations that do really great work in our community that you've probably approached but weren't named off earlier, or that came to mind, work together just because community and schools is such a huge component in Tumwater School District. And then also the Boys and Girls Club, who we provide funding and support to as well. Have you had an opportunity? Will those be organizations you reach out to as well?
Yeah, I've talked it together. I haven't talked to Boys and Girls Club. I'm not sure what their role would be other than us providing space for them.
Space, yeah. I mean, space is always an issue. When you're talking about youth development programs, after school programs, which those both utilize, space is an issue, whether that means, I don't know, a space that can be used as a study space, whether it means like making sure we have Wi-Fi for students to be able to have a resource to hook up to. Like, I feel like there's some components that can be utilized to make sure it's also a very accessible space for youth, and they'll have a good perspective on that too, in addition to the other organizations you talked about.
Yeah, I would add to that, and it'll be, ultimately it'll come down to a decision for you as council members. As we look at these spaces, we're going to be looking at, cost to build, but the real cost is the cost to run.
Right.
And how are we going to operate this facility, and how many staff is it going to take, and how much annual operating debt are we going to be covering? And, do we want to promote a space like a youth at risk room or a teen room? Several cities have done that, and I've toured those facilities, but those are rooms that make, zero revenue and need a lot of subsidy to continue to exist. So as we go through this process and align our goals and what we're trying to achieve with this facility, we'll really have to look at the budget space by space, whether it's a gym or an exercise room or a classroom or a youth space or a senior space. What does that look like? And are there revenue potentials or partners that can help us keep that operating at a low cost?
Yeah.
I'm looking at, I think I wrote down the 4 possibilities that you had. Port and 93rd doesn't have transportation, no bus service.
It does not, and that's on the matrix as one of the scoring items. It's bus service, which if all of their plans work out and everything they hope to do down there works out and they build a little city south of town, that's what they hope to get, bus service, and they are talking to IT. But some of the other scoring matrix is close to the city center, close to other businesses and amenities, close to restaurants, close to things that people want to do. As if we're holding events and bringing, say, a sports event or a special community event or an arts event, we're bringing people to town. We want to bring them to town, not to south of town. So I think they have some fantastic plans, and we've talked with the developer down there. If all their hopes and dreams come true, that'll be a great development south of Tumwater. But we are kind of looking for something in the community core. So, but we'll put it through the process and see how it comes out.
Community center means community center.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Well, Councilmember Kathy had to depart, but I believe before she left, she said she's in support of this, but would like to see it on the regular items for consideration. If you don't
You're
mind
talking
giving a
about-
presentation.
talking
to our
about Dawn?
colleague.
I'm
Yeah.
still here.
Yeah. Did I say Kathy? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I meant Dawn. I'm sorry about that, Joe.
But I am still here, yeah.
You absolutely are. So, City Administrator Parks.
Yeah, just one thing. This was one of the items that we were anticipating would potentially go on, consent for the, June 25th work session, because we don't have a regular meeting next week. We have a work session and we don't have another meeting, with a consideration agenda item until July 2nd. So we were trying to get going on this, sooner than later, but I just know that was just for situational awareness, no recommendation one way or another, but we are hoping to get started sooner than later, so that just FYI, that's all.
Okay.
And Chuck would be, poking me at the management team meeting in 20 minutes if I didn't say something about that.
Okay. Well, we don't do consideration at the work session. We sort of just do consent when there's absolutely sort of a need to. So was the plan, I think Lietta's, Councilmember Dahlhoff's concern was that this is a significant thing and that we want the public to have more information about it. So the plan at the work session to conduct a briefing on this. And then at the end of the work session, there would be a vote on consent.
I don't think so. So typically we were making an assumption that can be changed, but we were making an assumption that typical process for this type of thing would be, it would generally go to consent. So we weren't planning that. However, that said, Chuck could, I'm volunteering you, Chuck, very easily, we could put this item on the work session agenda for presentation, because there is room on the agenda following your work with the Planning Commission for the first hour. We could do that. There's time on the agenda. There's nothing else other than these consent items on the agenda. So we could have a conversation at the work session on the 25th. And then it could still be, I'm gonna have to confirm this with Karen, she's here, but it could still be a consent item.
Yeah.
On the work session. And I totally understand, Councilmember Kathy, we don't like to do action at work sessions, but because they are legally considered a regular meeting by the state law definition, we can do that. So if the important component is to have a discussion about it at the public level, we certainly can do that on June 25th, and then have it on consent for approval as well, unless Karen turns her video on right now and says, no way, Jose.
The work session is a regular meeting. The council has chosen not to do action there, but that's not prohibited by state law. And you can have both consent and consideration items if you so choose.
I suppose her other concern would be just that we don't allow public comment at the work session. So if there are people who have feedback, they won't be able to provide that.
We always allow public comment in written form prior to the meeting.
Yes, but during the meeting, concurrent with the meeting, where someone can say a public comment that other members of the public will hear on the record, that we don't do that at work sessions. So I guess my other question then might be for you, Chuck. It's like it's 1 week to wait until July 2nd. Does that mean that no work? I mean, that means no work with the contractor can proceed until the mayor signs it, obviously. But what are the implications of that as we try to weigh?
Well, there's kind of two things. A week in the big picture thing probably isn't that big of a deal. We'll, as soon as we have your approval, we'll send it back to the Barker Rinker CCAT and have them put it through their process and get their proof of insurance and all the things and send it back to us. That's typically 3 to 4 week process to get a contract signed and back and get going. So big picture in a 4 or 5 month process, it's probably not a huge deal. Staff wise right now, July 2nd is 2 days away from July 4th, which is the biggest day of the year in our department. And it's all hands on deck for every day and every night up until then. So the closer we get to the 4th, the harder it is for us to put it together.
I just don't want to risk not letting the community speak. I just, in with everything we've been going through and everything, I think whatever we have to do to make it so there's option, you know, we post it, they know it. That we had such good conversation back when, Chuck, about this, and community members involved in the community center and the, you know, Metropolitan Parks District stuff, that this is something that the community's hoping for and watching, and whatever. I would not want to do anything to quote bury it just without them
Yeah.
having.
I'm certainly happy to go either way. I know this inside and out, so if you need me to put
Yeah.
something together for the 25th or the 2nd, we'll go with that. And it is going to be a big public process. We'll have a social media campaign throughout, and it's a constant input from the public. They're deciding what it is.
That's great.
Okay, well, Councilmember Kathy, it sounds like your preference is that this be an item for consideration on July 2nd's meeting, and to do a very brief presentation. And then we would have the opportunity at a regular full council meeting. Is that?
Chuck, don't add anything new that you have to look up or do during this close to 4th of July, and come and put your feet up on a chair while you present it.
Right. Okay.
Have a little break in your whatever.
Okay, well, with that, I guess I'd entertain a motion to place the community center design service provider agreement with Barker Rinker CCAT Architecture on the July 2nd, 2024 council regular orders of consideration. I may have messed up those words, with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign council considerations. That's what I intended to say.
Are you making the motion? Or
I'm saying I would entertain a motion if you would like to make a motion.
I so move.
And I will second this motion by Councilmember Kathy and seconded by myself. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. All right, thanks. Thank you for taking the time to present to us on July 2nd, Chuck. We appreciate it, and I know the community does too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And with that, I think we're at the end of our agenda and we are adjourned. Thank you for a very productive, busy meeting.
Yeah,
this
thank
evening.
you. Yeah, good job. Yeah.